I'm happy to introduce Steve as the next speaker. I think you've been very close to this project. I think you should be proud of what you've done. Like Nikos mentioned early on, you've been driving this. So I'm looking forward, like the rest of us, to hear what you can share with us. So go ahead.
Thanks very much, everyone, for making the effort to come today. So those are our partners there, the three players' unions from Cyprus, Malta and Greece, EU Athletes, the International Betting Integrity Association, and CIS, which is the Swiss Sports University. So what we were doing, so there's been a problem, I think, with friendlies for quite a while. It's only kind of come out in the last 15 years or so. The Bosham inquiry took one Bosnian club, prosecuted them. That was part of their inquiry. International friendlies, about 2011, there were some problems with games in Antalya, and FIFA did something about that. And that's one of the reasons we've got the Nations League to stop countries playing silly friendlies that might get corrupted. The club game's not really been looked at all. So the aim of our project was to look at are friendlies more vulnerable, why they're more vulnerable, and is there anything you can do about that? So we interviewed more than 100 people, match agents, players, integrity officers, associations, everyone kind of involved, betting companies, everyone involved that you could describe as a stakeholder. We somehow managed to get to 12 countries, which was a bit of a miracle, certainly in the last 18 months. And we did surveys of players, national associations, betting operators, data companies and regulators. So the first thing we did, and a big thanks to Yanis, Spiros and Mark, who are here with us today, was a survey of around 700 players in Malta, Greece and Cyprus. And we wanted to find out what their experiences were with friendly matches. So it should be a bit bigger than that. So the players that played in a game that they knew was fixed was 13.5%, and compared to 21% playing in an official game. But to put that in a bit of context, players will probably play in 3 or 4 times more official games than they will friendly matches. So actually, when you might think, oh, well, official games are perhaps corrupted more, maybe if you think the amount of official games they play in compared to friendly ones, maybe it's actually friendly matches that are corrupted more. As I say, there's testimony for some players there that we don't name in the report for obvious reasons. And players playing in the game they knew they suspected was fixed was over a quarter of players, so that's quite a lot. There's a lot of questions in the actual report itself. I won't go into all of them here now. Who are the main instigators of an approach? Well, it's club officials in every case, and then players, the instigators and the beneficiaries. I think one thing that's perhaps worth mentioning, given the kind of wider background of weakness in European football, is we heard a few stories of clubs that were fixing games just to boost their budget. So that was in their business plan. So while it's very easy to sort of be judgmental about why things are going on, sometimes people were doing it just to keep clubs going on. I'm not saying that's correct, but that was the story that came out. So that was the kind of survey that we did. We also kept a list or a database, whatever you might want to call it, of suspicious friendlies. And it's really important we say these games are suspicious. We're not saying these games are fixed. I know 1 or 2 people would like to say to you, yeah, these games they were fixed. The only people that know those games are fixed are the players, the referees, and the people doing the fix themselves. They're the only ones that can tell you. And do I know that for a fact in all 257 games? No, I do not. So these are suspicious games. That's the only way to describe them. A lot of people had input into this game, Stats Perform, people like that, integrity companies, betting companies, football associations in some cases, and players. So some of the testimony came from players where they were telling us that they'd definitely been involved in that game. You can see this on average is about sort of 40 to 50 games. Last year there was significantly more, and I'll go into that towards the end of the presentation about what happened last year, because it wasn't a regular year, but it might become more regular, unfortunately. So we try to pick up a few trends in the thing, what it was showing us. Most games are January and February. Well, that's the midwinter break for leagues that have a break that don't carry on, unlike in England, in my country. So those were when most of them were. The rest of them were kind of in July. So typically those games are in what you might call training camps. And a quarter of the matches of those 257 games were played in neutral venues. And what I mean by that was Team A, a club from country A and a club from country B went to play a game in country C. So 3 different countries are involved, and that's a lot of the problem when it comes to trying to regulate these things. The games, typically they were played on a Friday or a Wednesday, because they're trying to play them on games when there aren't other league matches, because they don't want to clash with those matches, because there'll be greater liquidity on betting markets. And the times of the day that the games were played, I thought that was quite indicative. Often they're played typically to coincide with Asian markets. They can also be quite indicative of the games. In one particular game was in Armenia. It started at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. And I don't know many young lads in their 20s that want to get up and play a game at 9 o'clock on a Monday. So I think that's probably quite reflective of those things. The quarter of the games that were played in neutral venues, typically they're in training camps, and it's worth dwelling a bit on the way those training camps run. They're usually put on by match agents. Match agents are licensed by FIFA now rather than the regional confederations. They need to have insurance, and the match agents themselves, when they put those games on, typically they're supposed to go to the national association in that country to register that game, say we're putting on a game with these two teams, then the national association will provide them with referees. In some cases, the national associations are charging like €3,000 for referees for these games. And these training camps are costing 20, 30, 40,000 euros. If you're putting on 4 of those games, you've got to look at the margins that these match agents are working on. They're quite thin margins. So they can't afford to pay 3,000 euros for an officials if it's a third league team from one country and a second league team for another country, because there's just not the money in it for those match agents, and they've got to make a living to be fair to them. So what they're doing is they're not actually telling the countries themselves that they've turned up. They're sourcing referees from different other places, from regional associations or things like they're finding different ways of getting the match officials so they can pay them much less, so the training camp can make much more money. So that's the way they're doing that, and that's a structural weakness in it. Really, is in the officials. And when we go back to the database there of like 257 games, there were over 300 clubs in that list of games that we identified. A lot of those clubs won't know anything about those games because in cases it's the officials that have been corrupted, and I'll show you a video of that later on. And all this slide shows is we try to get an idea of how big the training camp industry was. The main places in the summer are Spain, Portugal and Austria. In Austria, you'll get about 250 matches over the summer period. In the winter, it's typically Turkey. You'll get something like 1,500 games in the midwinter period involving 250 clubs all going to Turkey. And they don't all come from Europe either, because if you look where the position of Turkey is, they might come from the Middle East or Asia. And in some places, if you look at the Eastern European countries, they're all going abroad in the midwinter break. In the Ukraine, in the season that we looked at, they all went to Antalya and Belek. The entire league independently chose to go there. So that's because there's agents out there offering these deals and trying to bring these clubs to these countries. And there's some examples in the report of another anecdotal ones we've had of clubs being offered free training camps, or some element of it is being subsidised or whatever. And you've got to ask, if someone's offering you a 2-week trip to Turkey for 25 lads, why are they doing that? That doesn't really add up, does it? And it's not just Turkey either. There's other places that goes on. So that's what's kind of going on in the training camps. So training camp manipulation, these are a couple of examples of things. We didn't, as I say, in the report, we don't try to avoid naming too many clubs. But when there's an examples of clubs appearing more than once in that 5-year period, then that's also something that's a bit indicative. There were 35 clubs that appeared 3 times or more, and 11 clubs that appeared 5 times or more in those 257 alerts. So these are 2 different examples here. One's Ventspils. Some of them will probably know they've been banned this year by UEFA, so they took action on that. They were taken over by a guy called Adlan Shiskanov, who's from Chechnya. He was running a club in Moldova where he's wanted on money laundering charges. He managed to move to Latvia and take over Ventspils, which is quite a popular, well-supported club there that needed a new investor. He'd taken the Moldovan clubs to Turkey 10 years ago, so he'd had experience of all the things that were going on there, where there were match alerts. He then instead of taking, he's quite clever in that all the games where there were suspicions of the Ventspils games weren't in Latvia. So the Latvians were trying to do something about what he was up to, but he was taken out of the country. And this is the weakness where you've got 3 different federations, 2 teams involved, and a third one where the game's played. That makes establishing who's responsible quite difficult. He took them to a training camp in Marbella, where there'd also been earlier problems with other matches. There was alerts of a number of games. In the one particular one that we looked at, they were playing a Norwegian team called Jerv, and with about 10 minutes to go, all the Latvians just attacked. All of them. It's pretty hard to stop people scoring if you're the only goalkeeper and 1 defender. And that's what happened. They streamed the game themselves. When they put the highlights on their own website, they didn't show the goal, which was kind of strange, really. Anyway, nothing was actually done about that game, although the Spanish Federation filed a report. Nothing was done about it, but they were banned for the involvement with Bordeaux, and Shisganov's now banned for life. The other game was from this year. That's a Ukrainian team and a Polish team. And that particular game, there's some very strange decisions by the referee there. No one seems to know the name of the ref, but obviously we can see his photo there because we can find a live stream of the game on YouTube. So some very strange decisions that will perhaps do with explaining. So it's suspicious, we're not saying anything else than that. The clubs appear to know nothing about it. So those are a couple of examples of the games that we looked at. So we did a survey in national associations to ask them about their rules, when I was saying about the referees and that kind of thing. And 76% of respondents required notice. Some of the notice was 60 days. That's completely unwieldy for the match agents that someone requires that much notice. Some of them only required to be told. They didn't even specify days. And only 38% of respondents asked for the names of match officials and match agents. So it's very hard to investigate games if you can't find out the names of the players, the names of the refs, the names of the match agents. Very, very hard to do that. And it's also worth mentioning for that National Association survey that only 21 out of 55 UEFA associations responded. And I would suggest that some of the ones that didn't respond because they couldn't, because the answer just would have been no, no, no. So that it's just easier just to ignore it. I don't know that, but that's I was going on some of the responses we've got or people I've spoken to. I think that would be the case. So, why would you fix a friendly? Well, as we talked about things in the earlier presentation, there's a lot of trading for relegation and promotion, European places. Those are there's a lot of academic evidence to show that fixing a friendly matches is not betting related, and that there's betting that comes off it because people know it's going to be manipulated for some reason, but it's not fixed for that thing. For a friendly match, there is not really any sensible reason to fix it other than betting. There's a couple of things that are possible, but pretty unlikely, really. So they're only being manipulated for betting purposes. So we did a survey of licensed betting operators, and as we'll go into it later, there's a big difference between licensed and well-regulated, and licensed and poorly regulated. These are members of IBEA, and you see some of them are offering up to 7,500 friendly matches a year. So it's a big thing for them because when the leagues are having a midwinter break, they need content to offer. So it's a perfectly legitimate thing for the betting companies to offer. For some of them, it's 6.5% of all the matches they offer. That's quite a large amount, I would say. And on average, we reckon 3,000 to 4,000 European friendlies a year are offered on betting markets. These are licensed and well-regulated betting markets. We also asked the betting regulators if they had any rules on the offering of friendly matches, and only the French, the Swedes and the Dutch had some rules on the offering of friendly matches. And I would say that these rules only apply to companies licensed in France, Sweden and the Netherlands. They don't apply to all the companies that are here. And these are the unregulated markets, the unlicensed markets, the Asian markets. They've got a lot of different different ways of being described. A lot of the match fixing goes on there because it's very hard to find out the names of the person. There's not the transactional information that you would get from a licensed bookmaker that would provide to a federation or an investigator. They don't want to give up the information of the people that are placing the bets, even if they could, because then their customers will go, well, every time someone's knocked on our door and said this game might be suspicious, you've handed over our details. So from the side of the bookmakers, that's why they don't want to do it. That's the way the agents system works in Asia. So you place a bet at the bottom and there's a number of levels between you and the bet being placed. So in a lot of cases, these unlicensed and unregulated bookmakers, or loosely regulated, whatever you want to call them, they don't know the name of the customers themselves. So they couldn't tell you even if they wanted to. So that's where a lot of the fixing is going on. Now, how do these games get on the gambling markets? As I say, that they get there through live data. So the live data is offered by data companies. It's worth reflecting a little bit, for those of you who don't know about the data market, there's three big companies. We've got one of which has come to join us today, very kind of them, and they were very helpful in our report, Stats Perform. These three big companies are signing up exclusive deals for a lot of the really big popular sports, right? So they'll sign up a deal, and if they can, they'll try and keep the other companies out, because when you're a bookmaker that's offering bets on a game, if it's live streamed, that's good because more people will bet on it. So the dodgy clubs will be live streaming their own matches. But live streaming is too slow. There's a delay of anything between 7-10 seconds, even more than that in some cases. So they want live data from the game, and ideally they want it from someone that's at the game, a scout that's there. Now, you can't sign up an exclusive deal for friendly matches. The point that I was making earlier, they could be in country A, they could be in country B, they could be in country C. So they're a complete free-for-all. Anyone can turn up to these friendly matches. And there are also, which I think is something that's not really looked at, outside of the three big companies, there's a lot of smaller companies and they're offering all manner of stuff: pickleball, table football, flag football, things that I don't even know. Air hockey, I think, was another one. And even one of the unlicensed bookmakers even offered a number of deaths from the virus last year. So that's the kind of stuff that gets out there. And people are turning up to these friendly matches because they can, because it's played on a parks field, a training pitch in Spain or somewhere. Anyone can turn up with their device and transmit the data from that game. And 3/4 of the national federations don't require data scouts to register attendance at those games. So that's it. And it's a quite legitimate thing to do, to offer data from that, but it's a free-for-all with the friendly ones, and then pretty much anyone can turn up, and that's worth remembering. So I sort of get back onto COVID-19. So there's a lot of going on in that slide, I realised after I made it. But when COVID-19 happened, a lot of the leagues stopped, and even the licensed and well-regulated bookmakers, all they had was Burundi, Belarus, Nicaragua, Tajikistan. There wasn't much to offer out there in terms of proper league matches, and a couple of those probably weren't ideal anyway. So what was going on is there were instances of fake games, and that fake game is different to a ghost game. A ghost game, which some of these games were described at, is where a game didn't actually take place. Someone's got it onto the betting markets, and they're harder to do now because certainly the bigger data companies have taken steps to stop that happening. But there were also instances of fake games where people were just setting up teams, they were giving them jerseys, they were promoting these games on social media, and they were playing these matches, and they were somehow getting them on the internet. And this went on betting markets. This went on in Brazil, it went on in Vietnam, and it went on in the Ukraine. The ones I looked at was Russia. I got a huge amount of alerts of Russian games. I couldn't actually prove a lot of these games even took place, other than going to Russia and slogging around trying to find these particular clubs. These are all Russian non-league clubs, so they're all lower level ones, where there's been reports of they're involved with right-wing groups and also organised crime. So that made it even less attractive for me to go and slog around and ask them, even if I could have gone there. So I couldn't find out some of these games were taking place. That one on the left, that definitely did take place. You can see from what went on social media there. One of the clubs there even put out a statement while the game is being played to say, this isn't us. I don't know why. I don't know why this game's even been on gambling markets. They're saying the games are finished. Some quite big of the Asian operators there. Pinnacle are there, or they're referring to them anyway. The game on the right, you might wonder why that game on the right is there. It just looks like complete darkness to all of us. That's because that game was offered. Quite how the person that was at that game could see to provide any form of helpful information, I don't know. But that was one of the games that was offered. So what has all this taught us then? Well, it's taught us how to fix a friendly, really, if any of us want to try and do that. Because you don't need to tell anyone you're playing the game. Team A can play Team B wherever they want to. They can go to a third country. They can play that game. They can get there. The federations will admit that teams are doing this. They're coming to their country. They're not registering the games. They're there for 10 days. They're playing numerous games. They're leaving, and they don't know about it. Some federations will say the only way they find out where their clubs are is on the gambling markets or social media in the midwinter break. And federations have told me that. So if you want to fix a game, you want to corrupt some players or some match officials, you can do one or the two, or both would probably be a bit pointless, really. Then you want to promote the game on social media so that everyone knows that game's out there, everyone knows that game's going to happen. Then you want to live stream the game, so it could be a really, really crap feed. It doesn't matter because there's been betting on those games. And then you need some form of live data coverage from it. Now, that's not to say the data companies are anyway involved, because they're not. But what they're doing is they're trying to promote the games to try and tempt these scouts to come to the games. And because there's more and more of these companies now at a lower level, they'll come and they'll do that game for $50, and the company will sell it on. And you can see there that's a match fixing associate that we spoke to. So that's kind of where we are. That's the kind of the end result of it. Now, what solutions? This is also a little bit of a busy one, really, but I'll try to cut those solutions. I think UEFA really needs to enforce the regulations on the clubs that are going abroad. Some countries do it better than others. The Austrians have got quite a good system where they devote people full time in the summer and they record every game, and that's also about stopping fans clashing and fighting at friendly matches. So the Austrian one's an example, but that wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. But I think it's quite important with these matches that for anyone that's trying to investigate them, they really need to know who's played in the game, who the officials are, who the match agent is, and if there's any outside sponsors, because there's numerous examples of sponsors putting money into a club to go somewhere and play some training games. In terms of the match agents, their regulations aren't checked enough. I spoke to one match agent who'd been doing it for 20 years. he'd taken a lot of quite big, well-known clubs away on training camps, and he'd had his licence checked once in 20 years. So I think that's quite important. I think the clubs need to be educated that if they start live streaming their games, there's a greater chance of those games appearing on betting markets because they're live streaming it. And as a solution to that, you can put that behind a paywall. You don't even necessarily have to pay for it, but you can, where members of the club can access it for free. There is a way of overcoming that. Some clubs don't even realise what they're doing. Some clubs do. In Austria, some clubs will kick scouts out of games because they just want to play them. Because a training game might involve subs coming back on again. It might not even be 90 minutes. So those games really probably shouldn't be on betting markets. I think we need greater awareness amongst players that fixing a friendly is still fixing, because that's the start. Once the owner of your club asks you to fix that game and says it doesn't matter, it's only a friendly, then he's going to come back next month and it'll be a league game. So I think we need greater awareness of that. One of the things that's come up separately during our project that's been going on is Iberia have come up with data standards, which are aimed at having a decent, regular supply of data, looking at the way that it's offered. Stats Perform have signed up to that, have been accredited to that, Surfsport Radar, and I think increasing those standards and actually making them tighter. One question that could be asked, for example, is should data be sold to betting companies that aren't regulated? Because if they're not regulated, those unregulated companies don't report match fixing. So you've got to look at the chain of it all, really. I think the formation of a body to represent match agents would be a good thing, because then they can work with FIFA and the national and continental confederations to look at how to regulate things. There isn't a match agents body at the moment. There could be one, and that could be a very positive thing to do. And finally, national platforms to ascertain whether their domestic laws allow for the punishment of fixing a friendly. Because there are countries where if you fix a friendly, they can't prosecute you. Because you might not be theoretically, you're deemed as not being paid because it's a friendly match. So that's something that those are all things I think that can be kind of looked at. And I think I've got a brief, if I flick this, a brief 1-minute film. Thank you very much. Hopefully I've sped this up a bit. Thank you, Joachim.